The Saxon Shore was a military command of the late Roman Empire, consisting of a series of fortifications on both sides of the English Channel. It was established in the late 3rd century and was led by the Count of the Saxon Shore. In the late 4th century, his functions were limited to Britain, while the fortifications in Gaul were established as separate commands. Several Saxon Shore forts survive still in east and southeast England. Background: during the latter half of the 3rd century, the Roman Empire faced a grave crisis. Internally, it was weakened by civil wars, the violent succession of brief emperors, and secession in the provinces, while externally it faced a new wave of attacks by barbarian tribes. Most of Britain had been part of the empire since the mid-1st century. It was protected from raids in the north by the Hadrianic and Antonine walls, while a fleet of some size was also available. However, as the frontiers came under increasing external pressure, fortifications were built throughout the empire in order to protect cities and guard strategically important locations. It is in this context that the forts of the Saxon Shore were constructed. Already in the 230s, under Severus Alexander, several units had been withdrawn from the northern frontier and garrisoned at locations in the south, and had built new forts at Lancaster, Caister-on-Sea and Reculver. Dover was already fortified in the early 2nd century, and the other forts in this group were constructed in the period between the 270s and 290s. Meaning of the term and role: the only contemporary reference we possess that mentions the name of Saxon Shore comes in the late 4th century Notisha Dignitatum, which lists its commander, the Comes Littrus Saxonis Hyper Britannium, and gives the names of the sites under his command and their respective complements of military personnel. However, due to the absence of further evidence, theories have varied between scholars as to the exact meaning of the name, and also the nature and purpose of the chain of forts it refers to. Two interpretations were put forward as to the meaning of the adjective Saxon: either a shore attacked by Saxons, or a shore settled by Saxons. Some argue that the latter hypothesis is supported by Eutropius, who states that during the 280s the sea along the coasts of Belgica and Armorica was infested with Franks and Saxons, and that this was why Carausius was first put in charge of the fleet there. It also receives at least partial support from archaeological finds, as artifacts of the Germanic style have been found in burials. While there is evidence of the presence of Saxons in some numbers in England and the northern coasts of Gaul around Boulogne-sur-Mer and Bayeux, from the middle of the 5th century onwards, and the practice of deliberately settling Germanic tribes to strengthen the empire's defences is well established. The other interpretation, supported by Stephen Johnson, holds that the forts fulfilled a coastal defence role against sea-borne invaders, mostly Saxons and Franks, and acted as bases for the naval units operating against them. This view is reinforced by the parallel chain of fortifications across the Channel on the northern coasts of Gaul, which complemented the British forts, suggesting a unified defensive system. Other scholars like John Cottrell, however, consider the threat posed by Germanic raiders, at least in the 3rd and early 4th centuries, to be exaggerated. They interpret the construction of the forts at Lancaster, Caister-on-Sea and Reculver in the early 3rd century and their location at the estuaries of navigable rivers as pointing to a different role: fortified points for transport and supply between Britain and Gaul, without any relation to countering sea-borne piracy. This view is supported by contemporary references to the supplying of the army of Julian by Caesar with grain from Britain during his campaign in Gaul in 359, and their use as secure landing places by Count Theodosius during the suppression of the Great Conspiracy a few years later. Another theory, proposed by D.A. White, was that the extended system of large stone forts was disproportionate to any threat by sea-borne Germanic raiders, and that it was actually conceived and constructed during the succession of Carausius and Electus in 289 to 296. and with an entirely different enemy in mind. They were to guard against an attempt at reconquest by the Empire. This view, although widely disputed, has found recent support from archaeological evidence at Pevensey, which dates the fort's construction to the early 290s. Whatever their original purpose, it is virtually certain that in the late 4th century the forts and the garrisons were employed in operations against Frankish and Saxon pirates. Britain was abandoned by Rome in 407, with Armorica following soon after. The forts on both sides continued to be inhabited in the following centuries, and in Britain in particular several continued in use well into the Anglo-Saxon period. The forts in Britain, the 9 forts mentioned in the Notisha Dignitatum for Britain are listed here, from north to south with their garrisons. Branagh-Dunham, one of the earliest forts, dated to the 230s. It was built to guard the Wash approaches and is of a typical rectangular castrum layout. It was garrisoned by the Equites Dalmata Brandogionenses, although evidence exists suggesting that its original garrison was the Cohorsi Aquitanorum Garianum, established between 260 and the mid-270s to guard the River Yare. It was garrisoned by the Equites Stablesiani Gariananeses, although there is some discussion as to whether this is actually the fort at Caister-on-Sea, and being on the opposite bank of the same estuary as Borough Castle, Arthona, garrisoned by the numerous Fortitium Regulbium, together with Brancaster, one of the earliest forts, built in the 210s to guard the Thames estuary. It is likewise a castrum. It was garrisoned by the Cohorsi Batasiorum since the 3rd century. Rutupii, garrisoned by parts of the Legio II Augusta. Dubrus, garrisoned by the Milites Tungrecani. Portus Lemanis, garrisoned by the numerous Turnicensium. Anderitum, garrisoned by the numerous Abulcorum. Portus Aderni, garrisoned by a numerous Exploratorum. There are a few other sites that clearly belong to the system of the British branch of the Saxon Shore, although they are not included in the Notisha, such as the forts at Walton Castle, Suffolk, which has by now sunk into the sea due to erosion, and at Caister-on-Sea. In the south, Carisbrooke Castle on the Isle of Wight and Clausenton are also regarded as westward extensions of the fortification chain. Other sites likely connected to the Saxon Shore system are the sunken fort at Skegness, and the remains of possible signal stations at Thornham, Quarton and Hadley. Further north on the coast, the precautions took the form of central depots at Lindham and Moulton with roads radiating to coastal signal stations. When an alert was relayed to the base, troops could be dispatched along the road. Further up the coast in North Yorkshire, a series of coastal watchtowers was constructed, linking the southern defences to the northern military zone of the wall. Similar coastal fortifications are also found in Wales, at Cardiff and Caergybi. The only fort in this style in the northern military zone is Lancaster, Lancashire, built sometime in the mid-late 3rd century, replacing an earlier fort and extramural community, which may reflect the extent of coastal protection on the northwest coast from invading tribes from Ireland. In Gaul, as mentioned above, the Notisha also includes 2 separate commands for the northern coast of Gaul, both of which belong to the Saxon Shore system. However, when the list was compiled, in c. 420 AD, Britain had been abandoned by Roman forces. The first command controlled the shores of the province Belgica Secunda, under the Dux Belgici Secundae, with headquarters at Portus Epatiaci, Marseille, garrisoned by the Equites Dalmata. In the Notisha, together with Granina, it is the only site on the Gallic shore to be explicitly referred to as lying in literary Saxon eco. Locus Cortensis Sive Hornensis, the port of the classis Sambrica. Portus Epatiaci, garrisoned by the Milites Nervii. Although not mentioned in the Notisha, the port of Gessoriacum or Bononia, which until 296 was the main base of the classis Britannica, would also have come under the Dux Belgici Secundae. To this group also belongs the Roman fort at Audenburg. Further west, under the Dux Tractus Armoricanae Nervicani, were mainly the coasts of Armorica, nowadays Normandy and Brittany. The Notisha lists the following sites. Granina, the seat of the Dux, garrisoned by the cohors Praeman over Armoricana. In the Notisha, it is explicitly mentioned as lying in literary Saxon Eco. Rotomagus, garrisoned by the Milites Ursariensi. Constantia, garrisoned by the Legio I Flavia Gallicana Constantia. Abracantes, garrisoned by the Milites Dalmatia. Granina, garrisoned by the Milites Granonensi. Aleto or Alitume, garrisoned by the Milites Martensi. Osismis, garrisoned by the Milites Maurios Ismaratsi. Labia, garrisoned by the Milites Carinensi. Benetus, garrisoned by the Milites Mauri Benetta. Manatius, garrisoned by the Milites Superventors. In addition, there are several other sites where a Roman military presence has been suggested. At Alderney, the fort known as the Nunnery is known to date to Roman times, and the settlement at Long y Common has been cited as evidence of a Roman military establishment, though the archaeological evidence there is, at best, scant. In popular culture, in 1888, Alfred Church wrote a historical novel entitled The Count of the Saxon Shore. It is available online. The American band Saxon Shore takes its name from the region. The Saxon Shore is the fourth book in Jack White's Camelot Chronicles. Since 1980, the Saxon Shore Way exists, a coastal footpath in Kent which passes by many of the forts. David Rudkin's play The Saxon Shore takes place near Hadrian's Wall as the Romans are withdrawing from Britain.